I'm so excited. I have the best panel, so I actually was having to work on keeping them under control in the green room, so I think this is going to be a really good talk. So I'm going to get started by introducing everyone. We're going to start off with David Leeds. David is the founder and CEO of Tango Card, a company that provides rewards and incentives to enterprise customers. Tango Card's customers include HR technology, wellness, survey, CPG, e-commerce, and others. The common thread is that all of these companies use rewards and incentives to achieve some business result. David has lived in Seattle for 12 years and loves engaging his team in pre-work hikes in local mountains. David currently TINYpulses 55 employees and has been a proud TINYpulser since 2013. So thanks, David. All right. Next up, we have Kipp Bodnar. Kipp is the Chief Marketing Officer at HubSpot, where he sets HubSpot's global inbound marketing strategy to drive awareness and demand for HubSpot's inbound marketing and sales products. Outside of HubSpot, Kipp serves as a marketing advisor to a variety of SaaS companies. Kipp studied journalism at Marshall University and is the co-author of the B2B social media book, Become a Marketing Superstar by Generating Leads with Blogging, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, email, and more. Kipp currently pulses 130 employees at HubSpot and has been a proud TINYpulser since 2013. All right, next up, we've got Jackie Craver. Jackie is the director of Nintendo of America's multi-center, multi-language consumer service teams. She oversees the training, quality, process improvement, and operational groups. Her role is to create smiles for employees so they can create smiles for fans who contact Nintendo via phone, email, chat, SMS, and even snail mail. She's an avid cyclist who competes on the road at the Velodrome and is the captain of the Union Bay Cycling Women's Development Team. Jackie currently pulses 70 employees at Nintendo, including probably Pikachu, who's sitting on that chair with her today. And she's been a proud TINYpulser since January of this year. All right. And last but not least, we've got Don Berger. Don is the founder and CEO of Social Tables based in Washington, D.C., an award-winning software platform used to source, plan, and execute over 1 million events since 2011 for over 4,000 customers worldwide. Don has been recognized as an industry and tech leader by BizBash, Event Solutions, Washingtonian, MeetingsNet, Successful Meetings Solutions, and others. Outside of Social Tables, Don enjoys volunteering for several industry organizations. He was born in Israel, grew up in New York City, attended Hunter College, and got his MBA from Georgetown. He now lives in DC with his dog, Leroy. Don currently pulses 130 employees at Social Tables and has been a proud TINYpulser since 2011. So thank you.
Before the company started.
All right, so I know that we've got a couple sessions left until happy hour, so we're getting to that time of the day that it gets difficult. So we'll try to make this nice and lively, and like I said, based on the way the green room went, I'm pretty sure this is going to be a good discussion. So to get us a little bit involved, to get us started, I want to do a quick poll, similar to our last panel. And I wanted to start us out by asking the audience, how many of you in this room have a formal recognition program in place? Okay, yeah. And for those with your hands up, how many of those use Cheers for Peers as your form of recognition? I'm going to follow up with the next one, which is, how many of you use Cheers for Peers in combination with something else or use something else as your form of recognition? Okay. Yeah, interesting. So we're all doing something, probably a combination and mixing up with different combinations out there. But I think that you'll find the panelists here all have some different forms of recognition and a lot of great thoughts on the topic. So I'm just going to kick us off and start with David, coming to us as an industry expert in the topic. David, I would just love to hear, what are the trends you're seeing today in recognition?
Sure. I'll focus on three, and from our discussion in the green room, I know there are others. The first one I'll comment on is tying or linking recognition to a corporate value. We see a number of companies that'll have corporate value like, ship software as quickly as you can, or drive profitability in the company, or increase our net promoter score, or something along those lines. And they'll make it so that the specific reward or recognition is then tied to that company goal. I think for me, what's interesting about that is that it kind of forces the person giving the recognition to think that one step further. So it's not only did this person do a great job or go above and beyond, but how specifically did that help us or help our company. And then the other thing I find really interesting in this is when you show anyone in the company, whether it's the employees or the HR team or the senior management, whatever it might be, a pie chart of what people are actually recognizing, it's usually a very insightful moment. Not always what they would expect to see, but certainly a very insightful moment. So that's one. The second one I would highlight is we're seeing a lot more peer-to-peer recognition. And I think Cheers for Peers is a great one here, but we're seeing this in other areas. And obviously the people that are working together every day are the ones that really know what is this person doing, how are they helping me, et cetera. So we're seeing a lot more of that. And one example which I know will make some people uneasy and some people not is we see companies that use Slack, for example, and they'll use Slack and connect to our API and then kind of do a little bit almost like a homegrown rewards and recognition platform with no limits. So someone can send this reward, someone can send that reward, and it's not really there aren't a whole set of rules that guide what can and can't be done, and we've seen that used very effectively, but I know that's not necessarily for everyone. And then the last thing I'll just say is instant. Obviously the benefit of TINYpulse and Cheers for Peers, even if you're waiting for the results to be published and you get a cheer, you're notified of that right away. And certainly in our world, where we send digital rewards and digital incentives, the fact that you can send something instantly when it's earned is a huge change from somebody mailing you something and it's showing up 2 or 3 weeks later. So those are 3 big ones that we see, and I know there are others.
If I could pop in here to build on what David just said, one of the things that we like to do is also tie the feedback to very specific things. And at Nintendo, much of what we do is a team-based approach when we're launching. For example, we just introduced new core competencies within the company. And it is important to be specific and tie the feedback to something that is a business initiative and make it really specific and immediate. But one of the things I learned is it needs to be really personal. So I made this mistake. I'm just going to come clean.
Now's the time.
Now's the time.
Now's
I'm
the
on the
time.
couch. My feet don't touch, so it's like a couch, which is
It's
why I'm like this. So I wanted to provide immediate feedback to a team of people. And with TINYpulse on the Cheers for Peers, you can actually select multiple names and do one cheer to multiple people, which seems like a really efficient approach until you're the recipient of the same cheer that you got verbatim, right? Because as you see on your feed, it doesn't come across that it was a single cheer sent to multiple people. It looks like it just came to you, but on the feed, you see the exact same feed. So while it should be specific, or it can be, and there's benefit to making it specific and tied to something that is aligned with what you're trying to accomplish, and very personal, it should be it should be personalized to the person, not to a group of people. So, and then make it fast.
I was going to add, I'm sure a lot of people here, a lot of practitioners like ourselves, are looking for just quick, easy ideas. What we've done recently that I've seen is very helpful or impactful is we actually made stickers out of our core values, and then we give those out. We give each manager and executive just about a dozen of each core value, and they give them out whenever something really spectacular goes on. And then we give them out during I'm sure everybody's got their Friday or Monday or whatever, all hands or town hall, whatever you call it, and then give it out publicly. And then employees, in turn, have actually been collecting them on their laptops. And that's been a very effective way to follow up to David's point about this kind of instant core value recognition.
That's great. Yeah. Well, thanks. I think there's definitely, Jackie, your comment about the mass cheers, you're not the first person I've heard that from. And so that almost takes me into one of the questions.
I would just add, this is a mass cheers to that. Cheers. Just say this went to the following people. They're just transparent about it, right?
Yeah,
Right.
we are a team.
That's a good call. So I think that kind of leads me into one of my questions that I have for Kipp around, Kipp's been with HubSpot, and he's been with them since he's seen some massive growth with HubSpot. He started with them when they had about 80 employees. They now have over 1,300 employees. That's significant growth and a lot of change to a culture. And I know HubSpot's very proud of the culture they have. But along this vein, I think, how do you keep that authenticity to a recognition program, especially with an organization like yours where you've seen massive growth? How do you keep that personal touch, especially when leaders are starting to get more and more pulled away from the front line? How do you address that?
It's a great question. So yeah, when I started HubSpot, the marketing team was like 5 people. So we, peer recognition was a very easy thing to do when you're all in the room with each other all the time. You all know what everybody's working on. You can just high-five each other. It's great. Now the team's 130 people on the marketing side across a bunch of different offices around the globe and a bunch of different time zones. So it creates a lot of complexity in actually just recognizing people. You need a real infrastructure for it. And I think what we've looked at is like, one of our core values as a company is transparency. We're always going to be extremely transparent about everything we do, and we try to take that same step with recognition. So everybody can see everybody peer cheers, obviously, but then we have both individual and team monthly kind of award recognitions that we do. And we kind of also layer on some anniversary recognition, some other things across the team. But what we always do is when somebody's recognized, we try to give a deep level of detail around why that person is recognized to help them understand that this person did something exceptional. They just didn't do their job, right? I think what you run into with recognition too often is just recognizing people for doing their job versus recognizing people who've gone above and beyond doing a job far better than average. And I think that's what we try to do. And we try to give people that detail so that they can understand what great performance looks like and what performance-worthy recognition looks like.
That's great. I think that I'm going to kind of look over to Don here on this next one. I hate to interrupt your note-taking, I'm sorry. But talking about keeping it authentic in a time of growth, there's also the topic we discussed about, is there such a thing as too much recognition? And does it, furthermore, does it just become the expectation that recognition happens versus a display of someone going above and beyond? And does it, this is kind of a layered question, but does it water down performance in the long run?
Well, I think, I'm 34, I'm a millennial. I'm surprised at how little we've spoken about millennials since at the other conferences I've been to, they always speak about it, which I think is actually great because it gets a bit obnoxious to always hear about the generation differences. I think it's the status quo is recognition. So the problem with that is therefore how do you distill status quo recognition and exemplary performance? And if you're always expected to have this constant recognition and a constant kind of pipeline of recognitions, then how do you make sure that the time you really mean it comes through? And I don't know the answer to that. It's been very difficult, and it's been challenging. And it's almost like there's this IV drip of recognition that goes into every employee, and if they don't get their dose, then they're about to go into cardiac arrest.
But do you cause that by giving them too much recognition in the first place? Like, do you make them
exactly,
the addict, or are they an addict on their own?
Right,
Is the question.
and that's such a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I think we're partly to blame for that because we're it's like making foie gras. You're just feeding so much recognition. It's like it becomes expected, it's a chicken or egg. I think we did cause that problem, and now we're trying to solve it with freaking stickers. It's like, well, what's, yeah.
You ran out of everything else. You're like, I'm just gonna do some stickers.
That's it. I'm
Stickers are gonna be
I'm out
great.
of every program like imaginable. What about like no cheers? Means like you're just doing awesome. Like that's great.
Yes, the best recognition
Yeah,
is
that's
no
right.
recognition.
Yeah.
I might just take the opposite side of
Yeah.
this one.
Let's go.
Well, just in the sense that, so we're a 55-person company, and I think the bigger thing that I think we struggle with is, I'll call it compensation and bonuses and perks and all this stuff. And so if you're little Tango card, and you're trying to compete with some of the other really large organizations that are either already here or are moving here, it's hard. I can't afford to put a slide from one level to another. We don't have 2 levels. I can't afford to put there's just a lot of stuff I can't afford to do. It's not because I don't want to, it's because I literally cannot afford to do that. And so that, from my perspective, not everybody's perspective, that part is out of control.
But that's perks, not recognition.
I know, but what I think is recognition is way underdone. But the 2 pieces of it that I think are missing are what we talked about is starting to happen, which is recognize but be specific about it or tie it to something. And then second is there's a lot of stuff that should be recognized that doesn't get recognized and that you have to go look for it. We celebrate a lot of victories at Tango, but it's frequently a heroic effort that someone has gone through. What we don't do as much of is someone did a really good job of setting up a customer and supporting that customer, so you never hear about that customer. And so why would you ever recognize that customer or that setup or what had done well though? So I know that for me, I'm starting to specifically seek out those things that are going really well and that you wouldn't otherwise normally recognize. And so I think that it's underdone, but I think there are a couple things that are specifically missing there. And those, for us, are much bigger, are much more tangible, and how do we make those better than the broader world of comp and perks? And
Do you
and
fall
other
into the
things.
trap of just rewarding people for doing their job versus?
Well,
doing their job
so yes,
above
we
average?
certainly do that, because in the sense that whenever there's, so we have Cheers for Peers and we have some other tools, and of course we have those, so we want to use those.
Sure.
And so I know for me, every time Cheers for Peers comes up, I'm like, well, I do pause. I'm like, do I specifically do something this time? And I would say only 1 out of 3 pulses will I do a Cheers for Peers. But yes, I'm sure we overdo. I'm sure, like everyone else, I'm sure we overdo it to some extent. But there are those are the 2 things I think we're working on doing better, which is being specific and kind of seeking out things that deserve recognition that are not getting them because they're kind of just operating in the background.
So I will say that the recognition funnel, the Cheers for Peers newsfeed, is a tremendous tool for a manager to know actually what's going on in their company. So we, like many companies here, we integrate into Slack, so we see TINYpulse cheers coming in real time. And as a manager, you can go into that channel and you can see what's going on. And for me, having not being super connected to every nook and cranny in the organization, I can actually get visibility into really cool stuff that's happening underneath my nose. So I actually find the cheers feed to be just actually a good, it's like CNN for the company. Like, you know what's going on.
So back to what you were saying on the recognition front, though. I guess the question I would pose to this group is, what do you do when somebody does work that is extremely high effort, extremely above and beyond, but isn't aligned with what the company's trying to achieve? Like, how do you handle recognition around that, where somebody's just, man, they put a bunch of time in, they've worked really hard on this thing, but man, this thing actually just isn't that important in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
It happens sometimes. It happens.
So I think to that point, if you can distill down the pieces of that you want to reinforce, if it's innovation, if it's going above and beyond, if it's taking risk, the pieces that you want to call out to be role models for others, that's how I view recognition, different from reward, right? And the big things can be rewarded, but those types of behaviors that are really specific. So people feel valued, and I think if we're not making mistakes, if we're not screwing up, that we're not trying hard enough, that we should be reinforcing those things. But what are the things that you want to tease out so that you can recognize that?
Yeah, totally.
And then that becomes self-fulfilling, so other people will learn those behaviors as well.
I don't have an answer for that.
It's a hard thing to.
It's a great question. I think about like DevOps, like developer operations. Our DevOps team is always trying to like, make the latency 1 millisecond, and I'm just and that's awesome. But yeah, let's. I'm not sure what's the comparable. Like, let's do something else instead. It's hard. It's difficult because then you're also setting a strategic direction, and you're kind of overstepping your bounds. So it's very. What have you done? What have you done in that kind of situation?
I think what we've done is try to set frameworks around what you recognize people for. Back to you. So it's like we recognize people on a monthly basis for like experimentation. So sometimes maybe what that person accomplished wasn't significant, but the fact that they embarked on that project itself was actually the significant thing of it. So I think we try to do what you do, which is like try to box the behaviors you want to encourage across the team. But I think inevitably we still end up with a handful of people who are like, man, I worked really hard on this thing and I didn't get recognized. And they didn't get recognized because it just wasn't aligned with what the team, the company was trying to do, unfortunately.
So that seems like that's a topic of feedback,
Yeah,
right?
feedback,
it's feedback that they
prioritization,
need
totally,
to have,
absolutely.
and the behaviors to our earlier
Yeah.
panel.
That's great. Well, I want to kind of, I think you guys are all hitting on a very interesting point about using recognition to really encourage specific behavior. And I think that's agreed upon on this panel. So I want to ask you all, are you using recognition data then? If you're using it to encourage specific behavior, are you then using that recognition data to make promotion and compensation decisions within your organizations? I'll kind of kick that off to Jackie.
I'll
Do you have
take
that?
Yeah, so I think recognition is very different than rewards, which is very
Totally.
different than having the skills and competencies to be promoted to the next level. Those are very different as I view them. I think that you can show up to work and do your job really well and get the feedback and recognition for that. That doesn't mean you've got the skills to be successful in the next level.
And compensation is essentially a function of market forces.
Yep.
Right? Like, that's the core driver there, not like how many times somebody's been recognized.
Yeah.
Obviously, if somebody's recognized a lot, there's probably highly correlated to them having very unique skills and having a lot of value in the marketplace and subsequently needing to be compensated more because of that. But they're not directly related there.
I think the only place so far that I've seen us use recognition was there were kind of two things going on. First of all, it was a decision around I'll just call it a promotion, where it required a number of kind of the senior leaders in the company to talk about that promotion. So it wasn't someone thinking about hiring someone for their team or promoting from within their team. It was kind of a broader discussion about this person. And the peer-to-peer feedback, ended up providing some really interesting qualitative discussion. Because we just looked at what is this person being recognized for? What are the specific comments there? And there was a lot of, it wasn't heroics, like this person, closed this specific deal, and it was a lot about teamwork and support structures and tools and some other things that were particularly relevant for the promotion that we were looking at. And so I would actually say directionally for us, yes, that I would expect that we would use primarily the peer-to-peer recognition as we think about those things. So directionally, yes, but we have a data point of one. But it was really interesting to me to see us actually using that qualitative data.
Well, so Don, in the effort to avoid using millennials in my question, since you brought that up earlier, I did want to kind of bring up millennials, but instead let's flip it a little bit to, we now are having workforces that are more attached to social, instant gratification, open transparency, like they put everything out on social nowadays. So with that theme, and again, I'm not saying millennials, how is that changing the expectations of recognition in the workforce, and how is that forcing us to change how we do it? as leaders.
You were Snapchatting right before you got up here. You were totally in line with this.
I was. Okay, so I think, okay, it's a tough question, and I guess if I'm understanding correctly, I think if we recognize people well, and we do a good job at it, it's a very good it's got a good viral coefficient. So if you have this amazing, so what we do at Social Tables is we, like Google has Googlers, we have tablers. And you come, if you have the most cheers, you're a tabler of the week. And you get recognized through multiple channels, including our culture blog. And so essentially, the HR team writes a blog post about you that interviews you, gets to know you a little better, calls out some of the cheers you've received in the blog post. So what I think the opportunity is, if it's a really nicely written post that is compelling and interesting and revealing, then that person is therefore has an interest in sharing it through their networks, and that can potentially kind of catch on a little bit. So that's one example of how we leverage social to take recognition beyond the wall, outside of our walls. That's one example.
And Jackie, I think talking about doing something different with recognition, we talked about some other things you were doing, not Cheers for Peers, but outside of Cheers for Peers, that I think is also in that same area, recognizing them with something tangible.
Yeah, so before we introduced TINYpulse, we had a homegrown program called Burst of Brilliance. And Burst of Brilliance was a paper and pen, not a sticker, but so you could tape it to your workspace, and it was something visible. So it's fascinating with the digital versus visible rewards that were recognition that people like. And we ran into, well, when do I use a Bob, Burst of Brilliance? When do I use TINYpulse? What's significant enough that's different, right? And so kind of this convergence of all these different tools. The bottom line is we want to create an environment as leaders where people feel valued. You take money off the table and you feel like compensation is not what this is about. It's how do people feel valued, and how do we reward, or how do we recognize the behaviors that we want to have role modeled by others. And so whether it's, we're piloting the live pulsing. So with TINYpulse, you can thumb up an idea. It's another way for cheers, for recognition that way. It's just about how do you create a culture where people feel valued and important. And some people like the virtual, I want it now. Other people like to post it for everybody to see. People like to have, be picked and be the person that gets to lunch with the person of their choice. I think there's no silver lining or single way to do it. Is how do you make the workplace personal, and what Don likes for his recognition, what Jackie likes, what Kipp and David like. That's what I think this is about. And you give us a tool that allows us to bring that together in a different platform. And it's evolving, I think, as we go at Nintendo and certainly with TINYpulse.
And one question I think managers often forget to ask of their ICs is, how do you like being appreciated?
Totally.
And then we never ask that, and we make assumptions. Obviously everybody's aware of languages of love, or I think there's now the work one, which is language of appreciation. But different, if I like to get a gift, doesn't mean that you like to get a gift. So asking people directly, how do you like to be appreciated, is an often forgotten question. Now, the other thing I'll say is that besides recognizing the person who gets the most cheers, it's also important to recognize the person who gives the most cheers, right? And we call them cheer givers at Social Tables. So there's, it's a play on cheerleader. We're really running out of corporate jargon, aren't we? So recognizing cheer givers is also, I think, very important. And I have a conversation with managers. What's great about the TINYpulse Cheers feature is you can sort by sender and receiver. And when I see people who've given very little at a senior level, giving very little cheers, I'll bring that up in my one-on-one with them as just a point of order.
Yeah, two things I'll add. So I'll add it from the perspective of the specific reward, and then maybe why it's relevant for recognition. But two huge shifts that we've seen in all of the reward programs that we participate in. One is we have been we include a lot more nonprofit contributions as a reward option in programs that we run. So companies have said we specifically want to be able to reward, or sorry, have an incentive, if you will, being a donation to Girls Who Code, or Habitat for Humanity, or Donors Choose, or a bunch of others. And the percentage of that stuff happening inside of companies and inside of programs has gone up dramatically, almost completely driven by, yes, the word, millennials. Number one. Number two is, I think we all know the research suggests that, millennials kind of view how they're going to contribute at work differently than in the past, and their expectations, from work differently. And so a lot of what we've seen is that translates to people saying, look, if I'm going to be spending a lot of time here, help me with my life. Give me some services. So maybe, give me TaskRabbit or, Airbnb or something that ultimately makes my life outside of work that much easier and that much better. And so we've seen dramatic changes there, from the reward perspective that goes into these, many of these recognition programs. But I think, for me, one of the things I think is cool about that is, although that is very much kind of driven, if you will, by by millennials, everyone benefits from that, because it's almost everyone in the company that's saying, oh, well, that's a good idea, I'll do that. And so I see companies not necessarily having to invest, they may be investing or changing to make sure the program is relevant or more relevant for millennials, but doing that, improves the overall program, which I think is a really cool outcome.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of goes with, Facebook. Now my, mom and grandma are all using Facebook, right? So they're all benefiting from these tools that millennials are driving. So I think it's a very interesting concept. Jackie, I want to go a little deeper on the topic of, you kind of called it the peanut butter approach earlier when we were talking. But the approach of recognition, and does it make sense to spread a recognition program evenly across an organization? Everyone gets touched by it, or should the focus be on your highest performers and most valuable assets that you don't want to lose, essentially?
Wow. Okay, so a couple different topics. I want to tease that apart a little bit. I think recognition should be authentic by the giver. It should be highly personal on what is recognized and immediate, tied to the specific. So that's one piece. And so that isn't, I'm going to recognize everybody. It is intentional, though. Sometimes you have to find and consciously pause and think about who you want to recognize, who did I interact with this week. So I think as leaders, we have to make that a practice. So I think that's one piece. I feel very strongly that everybody deserves the right to be recognized. And I don't think that, hey, you're all doing a great job is recognition. I think that is absolutely devaluing recognition because it doesn't tie to anything that you want to reinforce. I also think that as a competitor, an athlete, I think that, in athletics, there's a winner. I'm a bike racer. So 50 of us line up for a bike race, one wins and 49 lose, right? So just by lining up and giving everybody the ribbon and giving everybody the same recognition, giving everybody the same acknowledgement of what they accomplished, I think it devalues the top performers, and quite frankly, the other performers know that. There's a difference. So that's where I really feel like recognition needs to be personal. Now, I'll use the example, someone lining up for a bike race may never intend to win, but lining up is a win. There are small V's in life and work, small victories that you should acknowledge because that turns into a bigger victory, and sometime then they may become through time, through opportunity, through coaching, the winner, the big winner. And so recognition, again, when it's personal and tied to specifics and recognizing the behavior you want to reward, that looks different for top performers than it does for someone that you might stack rank differently, but it's still important for both.
Yep. That's great.
So that's what I think.
Yeah, and curious to hear from you guys then with that mentality. It's important for all, but it's different. how are you then applying your recognition programs differently for the people that are performing, but then to recognize those that are top performers or going way above and beyond?
I think she said it right. You're like, everybody has the right to be recognized. I think we should just make that a T-shirt. Like it's a good slogan there.
Yeah.
But it's you should go into marketing. But I think what's interesting there is that just because you have the right to be doesn't mean. I think your point is that doesn't mean you are going to be recognized, and that your recognition programs are inclusive of everybody, but you are going to recognize a certain level of performance. And I think it's our job as leaders for people who aren't getting recognized, meaning they aren't meeting that bar of performance, they need feedback and coaching and everything to get there, or they need to just understand they're not the right person for the role that they're in.
I think this is an area where I actually think TINYpulse has helped our company the most, because the top performers always get recognized. Yeah. I mean, it's a sales win or delivering an engineering product. I mean, it's in a lot of companies, it's the same 10 people that get recognized all the time, and that often translates into compensation and a bunch of other things. The two areas where TINYpulse has helped us a lot on this is one, the Cheers for Peers, which I know we've mentioned several times, but I found, I should just say that, a lot of kind of the unsung heroes there, the people that are just getting the work done day to day that merit some investigation. It may or may not merit additional recognition, but merit some investigation. The second is for any of the administrators, which I am, the tiny punches, which I learned today, which is awesome. I reach out to almost all of those people. And of course, a small percentage agree to a walk. My thing is a walk, so a walk or a coffee or whatever. But often it's those people who are so committed to improve the company, at some fundamental level. And that, for me, that commitment to improve the company is pretty amazing. And so it doesn't always lead to incremental recognition. Sometimes it does. But those are two material ways that TINYpulse has helped us just get smarter about recognition. Because again, for me, the top performers, so to speak, always, and forevermore will get the recognition. That's not the group that needs it. It's kind of the unsung heroes.
I think there are two interesting kind of paths of recognition that we haven't talked about, which you kind of alluded to it at the beginning, which is with your cheersing of a group. It's how do you recognize teams versus individuals? And I don't think we've really talked at all about how you recognize managers versus individual contributors there. I feel
was just actually thinking
recognition
about that.
changes
the
a lot
managers
there.
are almost like the lost.
They absolutely are.
The lost people.
If you're a middle
They're like the
manager,
lost
if you're
tribe,
a middle manager, your recognition
They're like the 13th
sucks.
tribe of Israel.
So true.
Yeah.
Where are they?
Totally.
Yeah. And
So what do you do about it?
Yeah, I'm reflecting here, man. I'm like, oh my God. I get one cheers a week.
That's pretty good.
Right?
That's better than I get. That's better than I get.
The word, right. I gotta go. I am very depressed right now. No, but seriously, the management layer, right? The front line, the mid-level tier is definitely the needs some love, and you have to think about a holistic system. I don't have the answer. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has the answer. That's why I think that's why we're talking about it.
I think it's accountability, right? I mean, every level needs to make sure that they're taking care of one level below. The higher you are on the org chart, so to speak, the more responsibility you have for recognition across and down, perhaps.
Yeah, one way we've tried to deal with it is we have a Remarkable Manager Award every month, and it's peer nominated, right? And so what you'll find is that teams will come together and everybody on a team will nominate the manager.
Yeah,
and they will they will game the system and make sure that person gets recognized.
Yeah.
And that's far better than I think us saying that person's doing a great job. So, but man, it's not perfect by any shape or size.
We have a program called Tabletop, which is a lunch with me every 2 weeks, and that's essentially one high performer per team for lunch. With me, that was a way of kind of scaling conversations with me at 130 employees, which has been good. I'm sure other people do something similar, but.
How are you going about choosing who gets to have that lunch with you?
Every quarter, the executive team does a what we call PVP, which is potential versus performance, and up and to the right employees are the ones that fall in that category, and then are up for the pool, and we just cycle through them.
That's great. That's a
But
great
no
point.
managers, really.
Excuse me?
Are managers included in
There are
that?
managers included
Okay,
too,
nice.
yep,
That's
yep,
cool.
yep. Managers, directors, VPs.
So I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit in the last few minutes we have, but wanted to hear your thoughts. First want to start with, being that there's a number of C-suite representatives on this panel, you've got a lot of stuff on your plate. So when it comes to thinking about recognition and the importance of that as a strategy at your company, where does it fall in your list of priorities? Is it top 3? Is it top 5? Top 1? Where are you guys, thinking about that as a strategy and where it falls in your importance ranking? Anyone want to jump in?
I mean, having great and motivated people enables you to do everything. You don't have that, then you just might as well go home. You just have a cute idea at that point, like you do. You don't have any way to actually do it. And so I think for us, it's like, man, how do we obsess over it? We look at employee NPS and attrition rate. Are people leaving and going someplace else because they haven't been the recognition, the growth, the opportunity they deserve? Because, man, the cost of that is also super high.
That's right.
So I'm a firm believer in it's trite, right? You take care of your people and they'll take care of your customers, which takes care of your business. I think it has to be intentional, and it has to start, you get what you model. And so by calling out, by doing the cheers to your team, they'll see how they feel, the middle managers, so they will reinforce it on down. I think that's important. I think having access and discussions around the good cheers as well as the feedback that's hard to hear, and recognizing and cheering the people that have the courage to stand up and reach back out to you when they give you feedback. I think that's another piece that you just model. I think you have to build it into what you do and make it authentic, and people will see that.
Absolutely. Well, I want to then take it another level. A lot of times I've read up a lot on recognition and see that one of the big questions that comes out of recognition is people ask or want to ask, how do you set a budget for recognition, or should it just be free or organic within the organization? I know, Cheers for Peers is part of TINYpulse, so it's not necessarily an added cost. You're paying for TINYpulse, but it's part of that tool you're already getting. So how do you go about thinking of budget towards official recognition, and do you budget for it, or is it more of a organic, free tool that you create internally? Don?
I could start that because we're revisiting Q4 budgets and starting 17 planning. I was surprised to learn that my leadership was, when it came to recognition and employee stuff, they were doing this. They thought, I thought ops was covering it. I thought people was covering it. And then nobody was covering it. And that was very disappointing for me to learn. We are adding a line item on both the departmental level as well as company level at employee recognition kind of, or employee program kind of budgeting. So it's not something that I'm no expert on it because I'm embarrassed by how we've been doing it. That being said, the way we're thinking about it now is a amount of money per employee for outside programs, company level, and then per department, because some departments may have higher per head spend than other departments. So that's how we're approaching it. And unfortunately, I don't have anything to report since it's new for us.
So TINYcon next year, we'll get an update.
I'll do a white paper.
All right. Jackie?
So we have a budget for employee welfare, which covers a number of different things. One is the company-wide things that we do department level, and so we have a fund committee outside of TINYpulse, but a fund committee that does the types of fun things that you'd expect at a gaming company. We just play games all the time. And so there's a component for fun and food, which typically goes there. Then we have employee welfare budget that's personalized. So what motivates me is very different than motivates someone else. So our Burst of Brilliance program allows people to pick and choose. So a gamer can choose a game, and someone else could choose a lunch, and someone else can choose a bike or something. So So there's employee welfare, and then there's that component of employee welfare. And then there's employee welfare that is developmental, which is, okay, how are we going to grow and develop our team so that they can come to these events, so that they can encourage their own professional development. And so that employee welfare is also at the departmental level. So we've got the company, the department, and the person, personal level. That's how we think about it.
Yeah, we think about it similarly, and there's a budget set aside on kind of the people ops side at a company level, but on the marketing team side, it's like, it goes back to you, it's like, what do people actually want? And unfortunately, I have a team of people that their biggest priority is they want to learn stuff. And so like our budget mostly goes to learning, whether it be online coding courses, whether it be coming to events like this, whatever it may be. Like that's largely where our budget lies, and we kind of look at that on a per employee basis.
I have nothing specific to ask. I think like everyone here, we all committed to TINYpulse, and so
Yep.
Our starting point was just, send us the bill and we'll pay it. And it's just, well, and the reason I say it that way is it's just, we've all probably deployed 20 or 30 different subscription-based, services in our businesses for various reasons, and this one sticks because it's in a meaningful area. I mean, it's employee and team and culture related, and so this is one of those areas where we evaluate how much more do we spend next year as opposed to, how do we cut or spend less. But for us, it was just, David said, here's the price, and I said, great, here we go.
Yeah, great. Well, I think with that, we're pretty close to time, so I want to make sure we get a chance to open it up for questions for folks in the audience. So I know we've got a microphone here in the middle. Do we have any questions?
By the way, we have to appreciate his socks and shoes right here.
Yeah,
They're pretty,
seriously.
those are pretty incredible. The
Yeah.
color,
I agree.
your color game
Thank
is
you.
strong.
You're
there.
recognizing him. That's good.
I'm trying.
You should send him a cheer for that.
Cheers over
Send him a
there.
cheer.
Cheers. Here, look. Cheers. Cheers. Nice.
So I had a question. I'm Rebecca. I'm from Indiana. And in the spirit of failing forward, do any of you have an example of a recognition program that you launched that failed, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I do. When we launched TINYpulse, we way over-engineered it. So in the spirit of gaming, in the spirit of Mario, in the spirit of leveling up, we tried to come up with a way, or we thought we would come up with a way that a cheer equated to a block, and then you'd level up, and it was on a board, and it was visible, and it was...
You lost me like 30 seconds.
Yeah, right? It
Right.
was way over, and you got little characters, and it was an example with the right intention, with wanting to make recognition visible, which we think has value for many. We gave people the option whether they wanted to post their recognition or not. So you could post your block on the wall, the Mario wall, if you wanted to. So we gave people choice, and it was just laborious and expensive, and there wasn't a big adoption, and we were over-engineering, and then it conflicted with Cheers for Peers, and we had Bobs, and it was like, what the heck are we doing? And so it was just, feedback came through TINYpulse that said, I'm confused, and we tried to re-clarify what we were trying to accomplish, and people were still confused, and we said, let's just kill it. Let's kill it, let's acknowledge and reward that we tried it, that we learned, and that we were gonna stop as a result of the feedback, and turned it into a win, even though it was a learning that TINYpulse is so easy. So yeah, we learned.
I'll share
Not
one.
to
So we
re-engineer.
we have a monthly all hands, and we do departmental awards. And one of the things we learned the hard way is that if you have a metric that you're rewarding based off of solely, you forget a lot of the people on the team. So for example, our customer success team, we were giving awards based on who's got the highest, let's say retention. And the problem is half that team is operational, and they were never getting it, getting that a monthly award. And it took us about a year to realize that. And the same thing is true with sales. We were giving an award for the person who closed the most deals. Well, there are people with lower quotas, and they can never even get to that person's numbers. So just thinking about that and making sure that any award program does take into account everybody, and everybody's eligible. Additionally, we had a problem where on the engineering team, there was a diversity problem. We had like 4 months of only males getting our monthly engineering award, and we got called out on it. So we started crowdsourcing as opposed to letting a department leader decide. So awards can be very tricky if they're not really thought out.
We have another question.
I have a question about skewing recognition. Some groups are larger, maybe sales organization or customer service organization might be larger than the IT department or something like that. And so some groups tend to get more recognition maybe than other groups just because their sheer size, they touch more people. Have you experienced that, and how can you overcome it?
I have to jump in on this one. Our sales team constantly gets all this recognition, and our customer success team, which is essentially front of the house versus back of the house, is always are just like, we stay here the latest, we work so hard, and nobody ever does anything. So we're still grappling with that. Very difficult to do. And meanwhile, people are like, what is engineering and product doing all day? None of the bugs that we've been reporting are getting solved. So it's very, very difficult. What we've done is, we've started to do it, we haven't solved it by any stretch of the imagination, is being super deliberate about when we recognize and who we recognize and what we say in all hands meetings and such. I don't have a solution, sorry.
No, I mean, you just have to have clear criteria for what you're recognizing different teams for. And I think the biggest thing is just like, your problems you were talking about a minute ago, you just didn't have the right criteria. You were ignoring big portions of the team, the company, because of the criteria of recognition. It's like, once you get that aligned, and I think we've been through that, and everybody goes through that, you're like, oh, well, this seems like a good idea, but man, in practice, it rewards the wrong behavior. And it's getting that right is a big key to all of this, I think.
We found that it wasn't by the size of the group, it was by the leader. And so it has to be role modeled. It has to be led. It has to be intentional on what it is. And it's not that people didn't want to provide recognition to their team. It just wasn't intrinsically easy for them. So it was, how do you help people learn what you're trying to create in your culture?
Yeah, I'll also add that usually when departments are not being recognized, it's not because they're not, it's just because it's harder to sometimes communicate the value that they add. With sales, it's like, oh, they brought this many dollars in. It's harder when you don't see it. So taking the time to fully explain and articulate the impact that groups have that may not be as...
It's like how you recognize the finance team.
I don't.
Your G&A, right? Like how do you do that? It's hard.
Right,
It's hard.
right. Well, so we do cash collected. But that's only one person because we only got one accounts receivable person. But yeah, absolutely, right? Totally. And by the way, how do you recognize HR people?
Yeah.
There's a question. We're making him run.
Hi guys, my name is Petra. I'm from Seattle. This is a little different. So a lot of organizations talk about celebrating failure, and that's something we haven't discussed. So from my experience, the intent of that is to foster a culture of risk-taking and trying new things. But when it comes to actually celebrating the failure, we talk about the trips, not the face plants. You know, like it still stays on the surface and it doesn't get to that specific level that you were discussing when it comes to acknowledging major wins. Do you guys have any great examples of where there has been a face plant and it's been a healthy thing to bring it forward?
I mean, I think nobody really wants to fail is the reality of the situation. For us, it's about rewarding experimentation. It's like, when you talk about failing forward, what you're really trying to do is get people to not drag the spreadsheet. You're trying to get people to do things. And for us, it's like, we look at that through the lens of experimentation. How can we reward people for experimenting? Sometimes that experiment will go very well. Sometimes that will go incredibly poorly. And so I think what we have to do is, but if you consistently recognize for experimentation, then you should be able, and I think we have been able to surface both types of examples. I think just even the sheer nature of talking about recognition of failure kind of sets yourself up for a bunch of trouble. I think it's just harder to do. I don't know, maybe somebody here's good at it.
Yeah.
I don't, so high performers don't fail, they learn. And if you take that mentality, then that's really, that vocabulary actually I think is in poor taste. The problem we have is that, the leadership team is changing its mind a lot. And, the way I think about it is if you have a plan and you're trying to go from Washington, D.C. to L.A., and you just kind of turn it on and don't touch anything, you're probably going to land in Vancouver. But you're always kind of fine-tuning it and fine-tuning it and fine-tuning it in order to precision land in LA on runway 3, at this time. So if that's the kind of approach you take, then from a leadership perspective, we're constantly communicating the tiny things we're doing to shift our strategy and positioning that as successful experiments as opposed to abysmal failures.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some face plants. And I think this is where we try and use our, the kind of the all hands meeting to like really bring it out. And so some people in this room will appreciate this, some won't, but we did a round of financing a year or 2 years ago. And for a variety of reasons, it came together very quickly and it was very attractive and all that. Of course, we celebrate that as a win. Before that, we tried to do a round of financing, whatever, a year or so before that, and it not only did it not come together on terms that we would have wanted, but it didn't come together at all. So instead of just kind of sweeping that under the rug and keep going, I spent 25 minutes of a company meeting talking about that. Why do we go and do it? Who do we talk to? What did we learn? And then obviously, answering some anticipated questions. What does this mean? Do I still have a job? And things like that. But overall, that was part of a strategy of which TINYpulse obviously fits in, which is recognition, feedback, authenticity. And if you only celebrate the wins, that kind of gets old after a while. So we do. I would not call that a celebration, just to be clear. Like, it was a recognition of I think you called it a face plant, of a face plant. And I didn't enjoy doing that. But I mean, in the long term, it was awesome. I mean, we successfully raised money and all that. But much more importantly is everyone in the company remembers that meeting, because it was like, wow, Dave stood up there and told us about this massive, face plant. So I think being explicit about that and honest about that is really important because, first of all, like everything else, if you don't say something, people are still going to wonder and guess and all that stuff. So we actually, when we have face plants, we talk about them in our company meeting, not necessarily through the tools we're talking about here today, but that's a key place where we use the company meeting.
Final questions?
Hi, I'm Cheryl from Portland, and I was just wondering, did you guys ever find, or I feel like you've kind of answered this by modeling and cheers coming from managers down, but has it ever been an issue where the cheers for peers has kind of almost been a problem because only the same people are getting recognized and only the same people are cheersing? So it's like, some people feel like, oh, well, why bother cheersing because it's always the same 4 people. So how would what advice do you have about getting more people involved or just people feeling like they're part of the organization on that level?
So I'd like to comment on this. We actually review our TINYpulse results every single week in our leadership meeting. And so that we as a leadership team can understand the words that we're seeing and understanding what's not in writing that might be a facet to what's being shared in TINYpulse. During that process, so we look at the question and the results, but we also look at the cheers. And we have a discussion and call out those that are constantly among those that are givers, primarily the givers, more so than the receivers. And we will have a conversation around, okay, so what can we do as a leadership team to be present this week, to watch for and look at ways to recognize. So that's one thing that we find, like anything, what you focus on, you get. And so if you focus on that and make employees and TINYpulse part of your weekly agenda, which is the VOE, voice of the employee, voice of the customer, voice of the business. Those are our 3 agenda items, and we start with the voice of the employee. Then it just becomes part of what you do and how you lead, and that's been successful for us.
Yeah, I think for just a couple of notes on that. A best practice I've found, 2 things. Number one is that obviously the app is huge because if I'm just like commuting or sitting in the back of an Uber, I can just send people cheers. So just like having the app is huge. Second of all, finding the time to do it on a week-by-week basis is really important. The problem is, at least I don't know if anybody can relate, for me, and there are way bigger companies than us, about 130 people, it's hard for me to know who to give cheers for what. I mean, like, how the hell am I supposed to know? Like, the really great things I don't even find out about because they were taken care of. So asking your management team who you should be acknowledging is an important thing to do. And also just setting time to do it. We have a guy, he's employee number 2, awesome guy, built our sales team from the ground up. I always know when he's on TINYpulse because I see like 30 cheers. Thanks for the peanuts, It's like, and it got to a point actually when we had some employees, they're just like saying dumb stuff via tiny, like cheers, just like gibberish or like inside jokes. So we have to address that. So, with cheers comes also some learnings, I guess.
Cheers.
Yes. Some jabs.
All right, well, we're at time. Thanks so much for the questions, everyone. Thank you, Don, Jackie, Kipp, David, for your contributions today. This was a great panel. So thanks.
Thanks, everyone.